to see you too. Buddy, great to have my longtime friend Leigh Steinberg. Leigh, first of all, I want to publicly thank you for inviting me to your Super Bowl party and setting aside my VIP ticket, and unfortunately my not being able to make it, but I wanted to say it publicly rather than just behind the scenes. Meant a lot to me to be included. It's been a tough year, but we are here.
Well, when I was a kid, MGM extended for many miles with backlots. So I grew up at the edge of Culver City, and we used to jump the fence in the MGM lot to play on the backlots, which were a Western town, a Mexican plaza, a South Sea town. And then MGM becomes Sony Studios, and that's where we held the party. So it was like full circle.
And that's a place I've always wanted to visit because one of my favorite movies, I believe, was made there, The Player with Tim Robbins. And so
we filmed some of the scenes from Jerry Maguire on that lot.
And that's the other reason I wanted to be there, is to be able to see that. And I've covered the Oscar parties and all that stuff, so I was really looking forward to that. But you know what? There will come a day. What do you think, since we're talking about stars and glamour and everything else? The NFL draft is going to be in Las Vegas, and I'm really excited, aside from the fact that this is Zenny 62 Media's 18th year straight of being credentialed. I think Las Vegas is going to kill it. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I think it's a great setting. But you do have to sit back historically and think about the fact that the greatest danger to the NFL in their minds and all professional sports was involvement with gambling. And they always worried that a player would get into gambling problems, shade his performance. People would look at football like it was wrestling, like it was phony. And so they had a iron curtain between the sport and anything like that. Now you have the Raiders there in Las Vegas, and you have the whole draft being held there, and obviously a hot hockey team, and it's become this wonderful market. But all of a sudden, teams that were absolutely paranoid about being involved with gambling, own part of DraftKings, have Indian casinos advertising in their outfield. So it's a major sea shift, but that's a city built for entertainment, and they have loads of football fans that come in every week and go to that part of casinos where they can bet on games, and I think they'll get a massive turnout.
I got to ask you, what for you was the turning point that made gambling and sports, not just in Las Vegas, but all over the world, come together? Because for me, it seemed like, but I'm not certain, it was a report that Mark Davis got a hold of from UNLV about how gambling could be done with sports and controlled in a way that these concerns you mentioned were, diminished. But what was it really? Was it that or something else?
No, it was the New Jersey law case that said gambling was legal, because until then, case law had supported states' regulation of complete veto of any gambling. And now I think we're heading to a point where at that stadium in Las Vegas, very soon you'll be able to walk up to a booth and place a bet on which team won the coin flip and which team kicked off and which team scored the first touchdown, and a variety of bets. It's always been the dirty little secret that when you have fans at the end of a blowout game shouting and screaming because somebody scored, it's about point spread. So gambling has always been one of the supports of pro football, and every other sport, but now they've acknowledged it. So and that revenue is going to stream through every individual franchise in every stadium or arena in the country.
And something else too, it occurs to me that since we're talking about the NFL draft and Las Vegas and gambling, when are we going to see sports books focused on who gets drafted when and just full bets on the draft and what happens in the draft in and of itself?
I'm sure if you made that suggestion to someone at a casino or at a sports book, that it could be the first Zenny controlled betting system, because
Great idea.
there you go. People bet on everything. And so, I mean, if you're betting on who wins a coin flip and who kicks off and who scores the first touchdown, you obviously can bet on anything from which is a college which has the most first round draft picks, which is a college that has the most draft picks overall, who's the first quarterback picked. You can bet on, there's any number of alternative bets that you could do.
Here's a bet. How far will Roger Goodell go before he doesn't hug a player in the first round? He could hug, right?
Yeah, when he goes off camera.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's one, and then there's another one of there's so many. Who will
the funny thing for me these last couple COVID years has been that the vast majority of players follow the draft at home, and a number of high draft picks choose to be part of a draft party in their home city rather than going and being part of festivities in Las Vegas. And they do that. First of all, there are a number of corporate sponsors that will sponsor a draft day party. So when Paxton Lynch had his, Panini sponsored it, and they paid for the fact we used the bowling alley. And he waited. I had to go get him when Denver drafted him because he was bowling, and Patrick Mahomes had one that was sponsored. So, but the second thing is, if you go to the draft, there's a green room that has a series of tables with the draftees and their families around them. Well, there's a limitation to the amount of people that can come and sit at those tables. So a number of athletes want every cousin and uncle and high school coach and pastor and person in their life around them at that critical moment. So they do that. The second problem is that they have hot cameras and big microphones in Las Vegas in that green room. So if someone happens to drop out of the position they're projected to go in, then they become, for ESPN or NFL Network, the case of the plummeting draft pick. And this poor guy, instead of going 3, went 15. So he's only a first round draft pick with a big bonus. But they sort of dramatize it that way. But what you're not seeing in the pandemic shot is the fact that, yes, you may only see the player and his parents there, but behind them, out of a camera, are another 100 people. And draft day is the most exciting day of the year, Zenny. It's the ultimate fruition of a dream and discipline practices that all started when someone was in Pop Warner. And you get all of the people around him who were part of this effort, and then the tension ratchets up. So draft time is not real time, it's water torture time. So if you have 10 minutes to pick a player in the first round, those minutes, seconds seem like minutes, the minutes seem like hours. It just seems, it goes forever. Drip, 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 water torture. Seconds seem.
What do you think of this? It was a siren I heard. But anyway, why is it that the draft class in quarterbacks is so widely poorly regarded for this year?
So football has become a quarterback-centric game, and without a franchise quarterback, someone you can win because of rather than with, someone that a team can build around for the next 10 to 12 years, and someone who, in those critical moments, about 2 months ago, we had 4 NFL playoff games end on the very last play. How's that actuarially possible? That's insane. I mean, if you tried to bet that, you get a 3-to-1 odds.
Yeah.
But it shows how narrow the margin is. So when you have a quarterback in adversity, he's thrown a couple interceptions, the crowd is booing, the game's getting out of hand. Can he elevate his level of performance? Can he compartmentalize and adopt a quiet mind and then elevate his level of performance to take a team to and through victory? And you have to have one of those quarterbacks to have a viable chance at the Super Bowl. So last year was a year with 5 or 6 top quarterbacks, and it just ebbs and flows. If some of them decide to stay in school, then it evens out. Maybe there are 3 or 4 top quarterbacks. But last year, they all came out of school. And so really, it was like a double quarterback draft. And this year, there are not players as highly regarded as that whole draft class was last year or in other years where, you have a year where it's quarterback. And but you're not seeing Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes or players like that in this draft. So there are 2 quarterbacks that people think might go in the first round: Kenny Pickett from Pitt and Malik Willis from Liberty. But now those quarterbacks will be pushed up because the position's so valued. So even if they have the same evaluative number as another player, they'll be taken ahead of them because teams desperately want quarterbacks. So when there's no market, what you saw instead was Denver look for a new quarterback in a trade for Russell Wilson. You saw Indianapolis look for a new quarterback with that they got from Atlanta. You saw the movement of Carson Wentz from Indianapolis to Washington. You saw a guy with 23 complaints against him from women sign a guaranteed contract to Deshaun Watson for $50 million a year. It's just, there's desperation out there to find that next guy.
Hey,
So go ahead.
Can we talk about the Watson matter for a bit? Because I blogged a lot about that, and I want to preface what I'm about to say with this. I really admire Tony Buzbee as a class action lawyer. I have for years. And however, what he did here was structure something that when you start to look at it, it doesn't look quite like what it purports to be. And I think, but I want to know what your opinion is, that was one clear reason why Watson was able to walk away with such a gigantic contract. What do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, none of us really know what happened in those situations. It's all he said, she said. So we don't really know. It's not great for the Watson case that there's so many different women. But Houston decided not to charge him. And so at that point, he becomes cleared, because it's all civil suits, he becomes cleared to sign with the team. What the feminist community or people who care about these things in Cleveland will think that's something they obviously judge. There's no question about the fact that Deshaun Watson as a player is within that grouping of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league. I mean, he's a magnificent football player, and he is a franchise quarterback. So I guess they felt that after striking out on Baker Mayfield, and Cleveland has gone through so many quarterbacks they've drafted from Johnny Manziel. I mean, time after time after time. And it never seems to totally work. Baker Mayfield was the first pick in the first round of the draft. He should be in the prime of his career, but they gave up on him. So I think that whatever it is that's there behaviorally, Cleveland must have done their own investigation and felt like they were in reasonable shape signing him.
I can tell you this, that one very high placed Houston law enforcement official, I'm not going to say this person's name or title, but personally told me on the phone that there was nothing to Tony's lawsuits. And that was the Houston police. And that was a year ago and 4 months when this was first wrapping up.
You hope, for everybody's sake, that there's nothing there. I mean, it's really tough because there are women who feel aggrieved, but but the point is that you and I don't know what the facts are, and they may never reach an agreement on what the facts are. So he's got a chance to resurrect and be a major star. And at a certain level, I used to laugh when people said, "Oh well, a team will never sign a gay player." Really, it's a meritocracy. If this guy gives a team a better chance to win, they're signing him. And the NFL has not been a paragon of virtue when it comes to giving people that are obviously recidivists in their behavior chance after chance to sort of make it.
And I think the reason why I come from this position is because I don't know if you don't know this, but Fred Lane Jr., the running back from the Carolina Panthers and the Indianapolis Colts, was my cousin. And I talked to Fred. Yeah, I talked to Fred just 2 months before he was killed by his wife. But none of us, and I'm saying this publicly again, none of us in the family, particularly those in Tennessee, my auntie Fred and my auntie Mary and Uncle Fred, wanted him to marry Deidre. Okay, and she kept everybody away. And I tell you, Lee, if that had happened in this social media environment, Fred would have been tarred and feathered. And I think it would have been longer to find out that what happened, that she was setting him up to be murdered, was actually the case. And it's the perfect trap. It's well, this woman said this man did something, but then you can't question women because you don't want to look bad, which gives cover for those women who want to do bad to do bad. Okay. And that's what's damaging our society again and again and again, particularly toward Black men, and no one says anything about it. And that's why I decided to really speak up, because it's going too far. And then that's why I did it, because I've cried a lot about that before, during, and after what happened to Fred for a long, long time. And it's very difficult to stomach. It's, you definitely believe in one moment something happens, but you have to take things on a case-by-case basis and not be afraid to ask questions. Because if you don't, someone's going to get hurt, because that's what happened in our family. And we're still dealing with it.
Sorry to hear that.
And so shifting gears, I'd like to know what you think about this NFL draft and the speed involved. The fastest defensive lineman ever, the fastest offensive lineman, and what it says about the possibility of future injury, and have our helmets, like the new helmets out, and other equipment caught up yet, in your view?
So I've been searching for the last couple of years in health and wellness for ways to peak up energy for an athlete at the end of a game. I've also been looking for ways to use the breakthroughs in biomed to rehabilitate players quicker and bring them back to service quicker. Because now if you lose that left tackle, the player behind him is playing at the minimum. So it's not just a minor drop off in talent, it's a precipitous drop, and it can alter a whole playoff drive. So, and there are things like hyperbaric oxygen and RTMS, which is a brain stimulator, and light stem, which results in ATP and other things. I've been thinking about how we do this, but the reason I mention that is that the training program and nutrition for athletes today is so superior to anything it was before. It's become a science, and it produces progressively bigger, stronger, faster players. So you're seeing 40 times from a huge defensive lineman that you never anticipated, but it's because they're using scientific-based nutrition and training techniques. And they're availing themselves of things like hyperbaric oxygen and light stem and a series of other natural ways to stimulate energy and productivity. So it's inevitable. I saw this back in 2001. I had Leonard Davis, whose nickname was Big because he was 375 pounds and like 6'5". And, you know, he ran like a 4.8, 4.9 40 at that time. That was impossible. So you're seeing that. Now, this will be a draft, Jenny, that's not going to completely excite the hearts of hardcore draft followers. It has maybe two quarterbacks. It may not have a running back in the first round. The wide receiver class was much better the last couple of years than this year. So you're going to see some building block players get drafted, like Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan probably is the first pick in the draft, and then a big offensive tackle, and then a big defensive lineman, and then a safety, and it's sort of going to go like that. So these are not marquee spotlight players that people have followed at the collegiate level, but they're essential building blocks for the teams. And remember, you get two big audiences. You not only get the hardcore Cleveland Brown, Atlanta Falcon, LA Ram fan, but you get the person who follows Ohio State or University of Alabama and cares a lot about, or SC of Notre Dame and cares a lot about how the players from that school do. So you get a big audience. Plus, it's just the inherent drama. As I said, it's the tension ratchets up and then it blasts free in this rhapsodic moment of joy and ecstasy. And notwithstanding the fact that a player may have been projected to go higher, once he gets drafted, he's totally excited. And it's sort of resurrection. This will be my 48th draft. So wow. I started in 1975, and you count 75 in 2022, you come out with 48. And I don't know. It seems like just yesterday, you and I were walking across Berkeley's campus saying that we didn't trust anybody above 30. How can this even be possible that I started in 1975 with Steve Bartkowski as the first pick in the draft?
And you're part of American culture. I mean, you're an indelible part of American culture. And I asked Paul Zimmerman, the late Paul Zimmerman, this. I had the pleasure of meeting him. I'm going to ask you the same question. What has changed about the draft over the years?
Well, it's changed dramatically. First of all, there used to be 17 rounds. So they drafted many, many more players. Second of all, the year I started with Bartkowski, the draft was in January. So if you think about it, what they did was they looked at game film. The players played in a few all-star games, the East-West Shrine game, the Senior Bowl, the Hula Bowl, and they drafted. And they made exactly the same amount of mistakes and bad projections and good projections that they do now, where every player in the draft goes off to a training facility and avails himself of the absolute best to get ready for all the drills. And then you have all-star games, and then you have the scouting combine, and then you have pro scouting days back on the college campus where quarterbacks throw and people do other things. And then you have a set of visits that are made by players to team locations. And so what we used to follow, maybe over the radio, but usually just by the call that a player got, because there was no televised draft, and now has turned into the premier off-season marketing event for the National Football League. And cleverly, they've figured a way, because they have the longest off-season, they figured out a way to keep themselves in the spotlight through this long off-season. You know, you have the Pro Bowl and the Super Bowl, and then you have transition and franchise, and then you have free agency, and then you have the scouting combine covered on TV, and now you have the draft covered for a week on TV and sponsored. And then at the end of that, you have the announcement of the league schedule, and they all are televised events.
It's just,
so has it changed? Yes, very dramatically. Remember when I started Zenny, players still smoked.
Yep.
That there were offensive linemen with stomachs, you know, the size of Las Vegas. They were out of shape. They needed training camp to get in shape. You know, I'll never forget going to a training camp, you know, watching players walk off the field and light went up.
I think about that. I think about a guy like Paul Hornung, who I had the pleasure of meeting at Mike Ditka's years ago, and about how just content and comfortable he looked, about how much of the batch I thought of him as a bachelor because of the exploits then, as opposed to just, you know, the great player that he was, right? Which goes into what you were saying. You know, before we close, go ahead, please.
Remember in our discussion about Las Vegas that they suspended Paul Hornung and Alex Karras for involvement with nightclubs and gambling.
They certainly did. Yeah. They certainly didn't. You know, something else too that begs a question that I should ask. What advice do you have for a team like the Raiders in Las Vegas in the context with the problems they've been going through? Because the one concern I wanted to ask Josh McDaniels about it because I was invited to cover the NFL on the meeting but didn't make it. But I wanted to ask if they had solved what I call the Las Vegas riddle. And that is, players, you know, go there, they get into the kind of trouble we're talking about. I thought the previous Raider regime maybe had it finally under control, only to bring in, you know, McDaniels and company. How should we think about, how should a team think about how to deal with what happened to Henry Ruggs and other players?
So there are all sorts of programs that players go through that relate to off the field behavior. And they start at college where they have life skills courses that talk about what happens when you go out in public, not driving when you have alcohol in your system. I mean, the NFLPA actually has their own Uber account that a player can call. Now, he has to be sober enough to remember to do that. But the point is that there are numerous discussions on public behavior. And the fact that if you want all the largesse, fame, fortune of playing in the NFL or any other sport, you have to so carefully conduct yourself in public. Anytime you leave the house, you have to avoid fights, you have to avoid mistreatment of the opposite sex or any sex. You can't put your hands on people in anger. And they're told this repeatedly by the Players Association, by the NFL, by their individual teams. So that's why the rate of those incidents is so low. Any one of them is very dramatic, but when you take them against 2,000 players, their behavior patterns are pretty good. And Mark Davis knows that. Mark Davis, I used to sit next to at the old stadium in Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a good heart. He cares a lot about imagery and the health of players, and so they're on board with that. And I would say that's an aberration that is just sort of inexplicable. I don't even know how you move a car that fast. I mean, I've never had a car that goes at that speed. But the point is that players know and understand this. They get this. They're held to higher standards, but they get incredible rewards for it. So we'll sit down our rookies every year and give them the same discussion. I'll say to them, look, if you don't want to be criticized, if you don't want to hold yourself to these standards in terms of fights and alcohol and treatment of women and financial issues, go play on a sandlot.
Mm-hmm.
I'll criticize you. You can go be part of a old timers league or something. But if you want to play in the MLB or NFL or NBA, you have to follow these strictures.
Well said. And I want to, before we close, also ask you about your speaking tour. You've been traveling around and giving a lot of great advice to folks. Where's your next port of call, my friend?
I speak in Las Vegas next month, and to a convention, and I'm also giving a TED talk pretty soon, and somewhere in Iowa, and the hits just keep coming in, Zenny.
Yeah. Is your first TED talk?
No, I've done one before.
Tell me, what is a TED talk? Because it seems like, did it start in San Francisco and come from there? Or what?
I have no idea. I did one in Orange County, but they're a set of like 15 to 20-minute speeches in which generally prominent people share life experiences, and they're considered a real simulator of self-reflection and shared discussion on the different topics. So, I'll probably talk about coming back from being sober for 12 years. I'll probably talk about how I got started. I'll talk about athletes making a difference in role modeling and why this can be so impactful, and why we all have a responsibility to make it a better world. And at the end, there'll be.
No, you know why I disagree with the this part? Because the one question I think would be one on the minds of everyone is, when did you know that you were Leigh Steinberg? In other words, when did you first realize that, separate from the players you're representing, you became famous?
In that very first experience with Steve Bartkowski, because I was 25 years old, but I learned to bifurcate those experiences, that what happens in public, newspaper clippings, fame, fortune, and all that, has little to do with being a good father, being a good son, being a good friend to people, and trying to make a difference in the world. And that you better not internalize that as if it's a real life.
Well said. I could not think of anything better. Hey, Leigh, I know you're busy. You got some other. I want to thank you very much for taking time, and thanks for being a friend, and stick around in the background. And folks, follow this man on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to Zenny62 and bookmark OaklandNewsNow.com. And thanks for being with me on the 18th year being credentialed. Oh, John Kala has a quick question. One of my long time. John, I haven't seen you in years. Where you been? Real quick. He says, hello, how many players do you represent in all sports? I'm guessing you and Drew Rosenhaus have the most. Thanks, John.
I think we have all told, with a number of different agencies, about 45 football players. We just started a new basketball and baseball practice, which uh, and are signing up for a first rounder for this next draft. But in the past, I had like 60 baseball clients with my partner Jeff Morad, and basketball, hockey, boxing with Lennox Lewis and Oscar De La Hoya, and I'm sure ultimately with our Steinberg Sports and Entertainment, we'll get back into that too.
Yeah, folks, I'm gonna let this man go so you can get on the other work. Hey, Leigh, stick around in the background. David and John and David, I owe you a T-shirt. I'll get to you. Dave is one of our great supporters. Made my day to see everybody here. We got Leigh, John, and David, and my mom. Hey,
sounds like a singing group.
It is. You just gave me another idea. Please stick around in the background. Thanks, everybody.